Welcome to the new Kevin Smith Great Witness Show, the New Adventure Series is. We're here with Dean Kevin Smith. I'm Dean Bell, and we're going to hear experiences, real side experiences from Kevin, and see if we can become more aware and recognize true reality life is. Hi, Kevin. Welcome.
Very often in real side experiences, we will have a certain symbology of features and details that are the same for all, and over time, as everyone shares with each other these symbolic details that represent something else other than what they visually and literally appear to be to the personal self, so can a catalogue of real side explanations for that which we experience becomes so. And the examples of such are numerous. Houses representing the personal self, cars representing attitudes, body vehicle aspects, etc., and so forth. And this would certainly make sense, for the guides do wish to impart their awareness bolstering representations and reveal that which we need to know at any given moment in a way that we will best grasp it, and so to use symbology that is typical for all, and over time becomes known as to their representations, certainly makes for ease of a real side interpretation. And when it comes to real side experiences generally, always is there the surface literal visuals that, as with anything visual, is therefore simulated, and so our personal selves are designed to perceive. As the personal self not only creates our simulation through the 5 vehicles of it, and is also a part of the overall simulation effected, but has the mechanisms to decode, to perceive that which is created, like a computer that converts the data of a computer game into visuals on the screen. And so, with a personal self designed to perceive a simulation it effects, this applies to anything the real guides also will create, as they will be working with the mechanisms of this simulator, that as they present their simulated creations, so can we perceive them through the personal self. And it's very possible that other simulators may have completely different mechanics. The same principles apply, I'm sure, the perceiving of simulation through the body vehicles, but as a simulation is all frequency and vibration, each idea of creation will have its own unique frequency. The different vehicles aligned with the unique frequencies that allow them to perceive that which effects from them the specific ideas, thoughts, and emotions and corresponding life levels, and we could have then other simulators with body vehicles that operate on completely different frequencies than our simulator. And I once heard a quote in regards to a creation, that if it vibrates, then it's simulation. In other words, these frequencies will only apply to simulated creation, for if all the ideas are these frequencies, and ideas only can be found in simulators, as ideas are encapsulated parts of everything that allows for encapsulated experience that isn't everything, as a comparison to allow recognition of the everything isness reality, then anything that is frequency or vibration cannot be found with the isness true reality, but aside from it in encapsulated simulation. For if you have something that is quantifiable, that is measurable, like a unique frequency, then it is something encapsulated that allows it to be experienced in isolation of the everything that life is, this isness, and anything encapsulated, any part of the everything whole, must be in the simulators. And as much as we have the visual, literal part of our experiences, there is that which is rather behind the surface. Just like the real universes of the ears are rather behind, in a sense, the overlap filters of the psych realms of creation. And just as it is only the real awareness that can perceive the isness, as it is the same true reality, and the personal self is only designed to perceive the simulators, so the same rather applies with our real side experiences. The personal self perceives the visual, simulated surface literals, but the recognition of the representation of what we are visually shown would stem from the real awareness that is able to read the entirety of everything that is behind everything simulated we see through the personal self. A real awareness that is through all of consciousness and creation effected from it, and so can read all the additional ideas, intents that everything created comprises of. So we are, say, confronted with a dark force created building on the real side, and the personal self alone can only perceive visually what is present, but the real awareness can read the entirety of all the ideas that the building represents, the intent of the consciousness that decided and created the building. And so it is as though for everything we visually see, there is endless detail associated with the visual, literal idea that only through the real awareness can be provided. And as we recognize our real awareness more so, we always will be afforded these additional impressions that add detail and explanation to that which we are being shown, and to the extent that you can even remove the visuals from the equation, you can have then what seems to be experiences where very little visually is taking place, that the personal self alone would very readily dismiss as irrelevant, and yet you can receive impressions that provide the personal self with as much information and insight as though you were having one of those movie-like real-side experiences, and according to the situation dictates the extent of how much of the experience is visuals for the personal self, how much is impressions, how apparent the experiences are based on the visuals alone, or how everything of it rather requires deciphering the symbology to be interpreted. As everyone is different, everyone unique, everyone's subconscious senses will be designed differently according to the individual, and everyone will lean by different degrees and fractions towards their literal personal side, or more toward the real awareness impressions, and the guides will cater the experiences to fit the individual. And I imagine that were someone very personal self-literal, that their experiences then would more likely be presented more visually, rather self-explanatory, etc. But ultimately, everyone is trying to recognize the ears through the recognition and standing in the real awareness that they are, that is a part of this isness true reality. And as the impressions from the real awareness require that the individual isn't locked into their personal self to receive them, for you can't access the real awareness if you are immersed in the personal self through the activation of ideas through its vehicles, so it makes sense for the experiences to become more so impressions that only through this real awareness standing can the personal self receive. For ultimately, the isness is a reality that can only be read by the real awareness once we recognize it, and were we to eventually achieve such recognition, then nothing simulated would really be required for us to receive that which we need to know. Just as Dwayne can just read directly from the ears that he recognizes, and so realistically wouldn't even require real side simulated experiences. But this process is gradual, and the real guides will provide the experiences in the way they do, impressions and personal self-simulated visuals according to each individual. But they certainly will test and stretch our ability to access these real awareness impressions, as ultimately we do need to be able to recognize the ears if we are to ever be able to move beyond the necessity of the simulators. And as I said, as much as certain features may have universal meaning, we each also will have a unique catalogue of meanings and symbology, that something may mean one thing to us, but not the same to another. If I fear spiders, say, then a spider in my experience may symbolize fear, but for another, a spider lover, say, this would not represent the same, and so the guides do work with our unique consciousnesses also, utilizing the ideas it contains. School teachers, for example, will have much symbology associated with their profession, to have the representations conveyed to them of what the guides wish to impart. Peter, my father, has much by way of symbology that relates to his work as an accountant, files, paperwork, offices, etc. And this real side experience would begin in my street, and the unique symbology of this is that I have determined that should a scene be transpiring that incorporates my physical level street recreated, it represents that which is very likely to become a physical level actuality. For everything starts on the real side. Agreement is revealed there first, but to become physical level manifest, even though in reality everything must be instantly so, every idea, decision, thought, and intent, because of the nature of a consciousness, the decided way as to its construction, its limitation in regards to cause and effect time, of distance, and mechanical limitations, etc. The thought of a house, as an example, isn't instantly so, but rather has to be built with materials, distance, labour, everything that is decided through the consciousness as to how things are on the physical, which really can be in any way decided. It could just as easily have been decided through the collective human consciousness that a house can instantly pop into physical actuality, and it would be so. And thoughts are rather fleeting, and although that which effects from thoughts are instantly so, and so we have endless, fleeting, real-side thought-generated creations, for a thought to filter through to physical level actuality, it must be rather maintained, focused on, and if the thought is a conscious, or perhaps based on subconscious agreement, then eventually will the body forms of the individuals harbouring and maintaining the thoughts and agreement ideas be motivated to go about the decided physical level mechanics to make it so. And when it comes to dark force orchestrated situations, they have the agreements that allow the foundation of their overall control to be so, but the specifics they wish to implement do still require agreement, as it is still a shared simulation overall, that for features to be common to all involved must demand that the ideas that effect the feature are decided and agreed upon. If they want a virus to wipe out humanity, then all involved must agree that this can be so, a kind of agreement contract or script of a movie decided by all involved as to the presence of a virus and that humanity will be wiped out by it. For if a simulation is exactly as we decide through the ideas we agree to in the consciousness that affects it, then we can't be wiped out by a virus unless we first decide on the virus in our experience, then decide we are to be wiped out by it. For in reality, how can a holographic computer game have any bearing on the holographic computer game character unless codes in the game, agreement ideas, facilitate it? How can a character in any computer game we play walk through fire, or fly, or seem to survive that which we think would be impossible in our own simulated experience? It's just based on that which has been programmed into the game character consciousness that affects the game character's simulation. And of course then, agreement to being wiped out by a virus would rather have to be agreement gleaned by more underhanded means, through subliminals, marketed ploy, through television, themes, etc., as that which we focus on and claims our attention is agreement also to the ideas presented. And it's no accident, as to all the endless virus and apocalyptic zombie type movies and series we've been provided with over the decades. For no one would consciously agree to being killed by a virus naturally. But anyway, if agreement is maintained to a certain idea, it will filter through to the physical and become so, like switching channels on the TV, that as eventually we settle on a show we want to see, so the show rolls out and is a physical level happening, and all the flicked through channels will be the fluctuating agreements that we see on the real side as future views, so to speak. And when events feature in my street, this always is a symbology that represents that which is occurring is set to become a physical level actuality, or at least more likely to be than scenes I may see in settings other than my street. But despite this, still agreements can change, and it may not become so. On this occasion then, I would find a large metallic and ominous building at the point where my street would terminate and usually become other roads and areas on the physical, etc. In regards to the visuals then, this was just a building. In regards to real awareness, additional impressions, this building rather represented the overall dark force idea of control, the control they have of the overall simulator, and a control they forever want to have more so, a control, a restriction, rigidity, very well represented by this large metallic uninspiring building, as though a boxing in of everyone into its unyielding and limiting confines, and a building that reeked of dark force ill intent, as that which is behind every visual idea we see will be the intent that forged it, as afforded us through our real awareness impressions. Again, very little was visually so, but the impressions were of a continued dark force intent to impose ever more so control over the simulator, which we don't really need to have experiences to reveal that this is their inclination. And as this building featured close to my street, so it rather suggested even more dastardly controlling schemes and facets of their agendas that they are close to instigating through agreement that it can be so. I would in some way try to disassemble this construction, as this is possible. We can dismantle ill-intended, unbeneficial ideas, as we are able to work with the effects the dark force creators have manifested for themselves that allow us to do so. Just as the dark forces, when thrown into the phantom zone, are really just the effects they have decided for themselves due to their abrasive life choices. For instead of effects equaling the causes in a simulated creational sense, so can the guides utilize the effects in such ways of a phantom zone placement, etc., and creatively also can the effects the ill-intended have created for themselves be managed in ways that have certain idea creations they are constructing instantly dismantled on the real side before they can have their unbeneficial impact, and this can express as real side experiences where we are destroying dark force buildings and bases, etc. But if a dark force idea has been bolstered with agreement from the masses, then this is an idea we can't so readily dismantle, as all involved with the agreement that applies are free will deciding it be so, and we can't oppose what is then an overall decision for something to be, unless we can get at it prior to the agreement that reinforces it, as in the case of dark force ideas we can eradicate. And so my attempted destruction of this building, this representation of continued and escalating control, was unsuccessful, and I would withdraw from it, and could impression all the mirth and contempt from all the dark forces that this building, this potential heightened control, was the creation of. But then my street no longer was present, suggesting that perhaps something in regards to agreement that pertained to this heightened control was no longer so, that this may not be now on the verge of being a physical level happening, this heightened control overall. And indeed, my surroundings now consisted of natural environment, forests of trees, rolling landscapes, a representation of the ears as it expresses itself through creation, the natural environment that supports life. And from the natural environment seen would emerge shafts of light, millions of them, that didn't become as identifiable a form, but that they were beings, I had no doubt. They were beings of pure light then, and indeed they exuded a presence, an isness standing, and I have mentioned how, when you encounter a real guide or dwayne, they have this undeniable isness about them that can't be faked. Well, these beings had that, and I would say more so, a purity about them that was rather beyond words, and they would stand dotted throughout this surrounding environment. They spoke not a word, they just were, and then suddenly would all glide toward this metallic control representing a building, as though from some unheard cue. I would accompany these light beings, and the sneers, the contempt, the overall sense I had received from the control representing a building now was changed to something rather different, more now an overall sense of fear, dread, panic exuding from this overall metallic structure. I would suggest that these may well have been the true silent ones, and I have never encountered them before on a real side experience, as far as my personal self knows, although, as I understand it, these true silent ones are shafts of light millions of miles in height, and here they were not immense in stature, more so the average height of a typical human, but nevertheless were formless beings of light, and as I said, they radiated with this isness purity, and my impressions were then that if they weren't these true silent ones, they certainly were very much pure light beings of the ears, and it would seem then their intents were to in some way prevent this heightened control that the dark forces wished to be so from coming to pass. Hence the impressions of the overall dark force dismay. And so perhaps we have the isness beings coming forth and assisting with the simulator situation overall to offset the dark force schemes and overall continuing controlling simulator agendas. For the ears is indifferent to the simulations, and it is everybody's free will to create what they want, the controllers included. But with the dastardly karma the controllers have amassed for themselves, perhaps this karma is now being made due, and can be creatively managed, just as the guides do with the dark force karma, as they throw them into the phantom zone, etc. That the dismantling of ideas, reinforced with agreement, as this overall control representing a building was, may be beyond deconstructing, but not with the isness, the guides, and these light beings, or true silent ones, who can, if they wanted, turn creation upside down. The is rather decides, or that it rather does, that which makes sense with all awareness expressed through all body types and consciousness. All awareness that is this isness, true reality. And this overall is a drive to recognize itself more so, expresses as simulators created, where through them real awareness aspects of it can recognize themselves as drops within the is ocean, which in turn affords the is greater recognition of itself, as these real awareness drops that recognize the is ocean they are a part of that which they now recognize, and so this translates as a greater self-recognition for the is overall. And as everything is then driven to this objective, the is overall more so recognizing the endlessness of itself, so will the is always automatically, if able to do so within the simulated free will arenas, make alterations and adjustments that overall benefit all life, and that includes a kind of deployment of light beings and true silent ones to make such adjustments, where the effects that the free will disconnected unconscious individuals have amassed for themselves can be worked in this way, as though the very controlling overall idea construct has deconstructed itself, as everything equals itself, and anything destructive rather eventually meets the reflection of itself and its nature, it rather destroys itself. And we might say then that the overall controlling simulated model is simply then the effects of itself, and has then provided the means by which it can be deconstructed, which then isn't a violation of free will, but the is simply doing what it does, making the most sense with itself and its overall singular objective of continued self-recognition. And maybe then we can see the possibility that perhaps this was how it was always going to be, that the dark forces bring the simulator to the brink of demise and implosion, but by doing so they provide the best possible wake-up for all in the simulator. Through the overall adversity they have gotten agreement to effect, the adversity necessary to have individuals snap out of their unconscious slumbers, and that the dark force overall controlling idea construct was always set to implode in on itself, that it could always take the simulator down with it, and all the unconscious agreeable masses, with their agreements to the controller ideas interwoven with the overall consciousness that effects the simulator, but that perhaps there was always likely to be a window where the dark force karma could be managed in this way. If the nature of the karma was a particular, that the ears could perhaps directly unravel it, or ease it to a degree, as situations dictate, that the ears is able to express its singular self-recognition drive in such a fashion. For after all, the real awareness that animates through all consciousness, including the dark forces, is this isness, though that which doesn't as yet recognize the isness that each real awareness unit is. And so can it be a view that the dark forces were always meant to be, and to bring the simulator to this point where is afforded the best possible wake-up potentiality. For after all, when real awareness is embodied in the simulators for the first time, a little karmic gift is applied to kick effects rolling, and if the dark forces are rather necessary to bring the simulator through its epoch cycles, can it be that a certain percentage of the consciousness vehicles, the real awareness, is initially inserted within, contains a certain karmic gift that is along these dark force lines, certain attitudes that will ensure that the dark force controllers emerge, and that really then it is just this one overall isness real awareness playing simulated games with itself through all the individualized consciousness personal selves, to bring about the best circumstances by which affords the best likelihood of a recognition of the ears, with each real awareness being, from the comparisons that all the simulated struggle and adversity provides, a wake-up that is always going to be more so if the controllers are established and bring the simulator to a point where situations are so dire that it is the most likely time where individuals will wake up and decide to recognize the ears, to allow extrication from a doomed simulator, but maybe not so doomed, or at least not yet, if the ears can deploy light being agents to creatively work with the overall dark force karma in such a way that the controlling ideas, despite how much agreement momentum they have, can be dismantled.
Terrific as always, Kevin. Yes, and seeing that as things become maxed out, in other words, to their maximum, the boys step in, and because there are a lot of people that want to wake up, so things are utilized accordingly. So they know what they're doing, and we will see the effects of it, etc., as it filters down into the physical. But you're getting a big preview of that. Yes, I see that. And so again, it's not necessary. Just like a person going through boot camp, he has to crawl under machine gun fire, but he doesn't have to, crawl through landmines and possibly be exploded. It just comes to a point where, enough is enough. And so the lessons are learned, and things being so, because it's hard enough here, they see that, but at the same time, you know, people have to decide to wake up and face something from everything they've known, which has been basically their la-la land for many lifetimes. And so this possibility exists now. So that's just very, very good, Kevin, that you share this. Thank you so much.
We still have a chance. Okay. Yeah, so you're playing around here with different dimensions, the real side. It's cool that you're doing this and you're bringing back information. That's so cool. And you apparently met the light beings there. That's so cool because they don't make themselves appear too often. But they are doing things around in the creation, and you are witness to it. That's why you're doing this show, and that's why you're reporting back. So appreciate it. I know Dwayne talks about there is a chance still. I mean, enough agreement occurs, and beings like you are working on the real side to gain agreement from others. It's just so difficult to bring it through here in the physical. That's the thing. It's just, even though people could agree on the real side, bringing it through for themselves and others, it's a big challenge. It can be done. So we'll see where it goes. Basically, that's all I have to say is just like, that's cool that you're doing this, Kevin, and you're bringing it back. And what we have to go through, I know Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the Queen's lands are being locked down, so they're easing their way to the control and to lock people down, through what they're doing. Those are kind of the test countries. Australia right now is really bad. So we'll see where it goes. People apparently I don't know what they're doing there. They're not apparently standing up or resisting as much as they could in their own creative way. Again, we have Sheriff Mack here that we're trying to locate and to vet the sheriffs in the United States. I don't think he has he's trying to get 1,000. I think there's 3,100 sheriffs in the United States. I don't think he has 500 yet, but those that he has on his side, so to speak, side to constitutional sheriffs, they are active in their areas. So we're doing that here, Kevin. We're doing something here with the sheriffs and trying to get them on board with support so they can protect the civil rights of the people here, so we can get another minute or two of freedom, so-called freedom, to operate, to help people wake up. So we'll see where it goes. Funding is a big thing too. Once we get funding, people will be paying attention to what we do with the environment. We're going to take it and basically through the environment help people see what's going on, because a lot of this is just helping people see what's going on, see what they're agreeing to, which is mainly misinformation. And Dwayne put out a number of Facebook groups about misinformation. Just the bad guys we're not going at it as a battle to fight people. It's just these people that are so-called bad or evil, they just have the wrong misinformation. So they're following that. They're following their decisions to do things based on misinformation. If they had the right information and were willing to make better decisions, it could go another way. So it's all about that. We don't want to start a battle, because that's the real guides don't battle. It's not about that. It's not about fighting. That's been done, doesn't work, it goes nowhere. But you can, place people in different positions, relocate them. With awareness, you have this ability to be like above the conflict. Physically, yeah, it's a challenge, but with your real awareness, you can get above and beyond, and better survival rate with what you're doing. So that's it for me, Kevin. Thank you for that experience. That was cool.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% certain they were the true light beings, the true silent ones. I had the impression that's what they were, but I can't say 100% certainty. All I can say for sure were they were definitely light beings of the ears, because they had that very extreme isness presence about them that you experience when you're in the presence of Dwayne or the guides on the real side. And they didn't speak, which is apparently one of the features of the true silent ones. Otherwise, there wouldn't be had the word silent in their title, I suppose. But, yeah, it was quite an interesting experience. I say the overall of it was as though if simulators reach a certain point of distortion, there seems to be possible windows in which the entirety of the distorted overall restriction that is in the overall consciousness can be managed in very extreme ways. I had the impression this was now in effect that, like I said in the experience, it's not like the isness decides things. It's more like the isness always expresses what it is, and what it is basically the survival and the continued recognition of itself. So everything that comes from that is basically always an expression of that one singular drive and purpose. And so it seems that even though the is can't interfere with, it's not like it can't interfere with free will, but it's almost as though if situations are just so, then and the is always expressing as that which it is, which is the continued survival and recognition of itself. If the effects which through the overall consciousness are meeting themselves in that they are basically self-constructing because the nature of such a restricted and distorted consciousness, it's almost as though at a certain point there's a window where the is in a constant expression of the nature itself can come into creation and make alterations to the consciousness in very extreme ways that can literally, like Dwayne has said, I mean, the guides, if they wanted to, they could turn creation upside down. And it seems the only thing that prevents them from doing that is that unless they have to be rather cautious, they don't embroil themselves in karma or creation themselves, because obviously if they're creating or impacting on creations that are already in through the consciousness, then they will be the effects of them. But they can creatively manage the effects, particularly as it comes to these restricting and self-destructive causes, because basically they're simply providing effects. They're simply bringing forth effects as a variation of what the controllers would have been experiencing for themselves. So it's almost like a creative way of utilizing the dark force controller's own abrasive causes in sort of ways that are more beneficial, because otherwise the controllers would simply experience a reflection of their abrasiveness, and that would just be simulated and would almost be situations they are simply having for themselves. But if the guys can creatively manage it, then they can cause situations which are more beneficial overall, particularly when it comes to deconstructing parts of the consciousness, which it seems that this overall experience, that was the general idea, because that building represented in its entirety the overall consciousness of control, with all the agreements throughout the consciousness interwoven with it. And so that's a very hard thing to manage or impact on, because it's bolstered and reinforced with agreement. And so it's not just a dark forces individual's creation, it's a creation that involves everybody else's consciousness as well through the agreements. And so it's not just the effects of the controller you would be impacting, but also the effects of what everybody else was free will deciding as well. But as I said, that experience overall seemed as though the overall effect through the consciousness was a particular, that it could be managed overall by the ISSS in this way, and there's an experience that then follows on from this one as well, which I'm going to be sharing on the Galactic show tomorrow, which is almost a continuation from it, and almost more, adds more to that idea. But
Yeah, we've kind of awoken the sleeping giant here during this time in history with our tech age and the communications that we have. It's more of a collective now, collective consciousness, collective whatever. It's more, it's bigger and it's more visible, you could say, apparent, or not. They're hidden, but it's more, it's big, it's on a grander scale kind of because of what we have here with technology. And so, like, on a mundane level, Dwayne talks about his rashes and how the guides let the rashes through so that they could have access to the bad guys, the dark forces, by them collecting karma. So this is going on here too with maybe at some point the karma is so great that they can come in and do something to offset it, or the is can do something, can do something anytime, but it's this karma, playing around with karma here on a collective basis. It's so huge and it's affecting so many people. And so many people are being harmed by what the controller is doing. So they're collecting their karma, and it's due, could be due, could be due now. So we'll see how it's played out. It's always day by day, free will. And then decisions by the real guides and how they're gonna do what they do.
This real side experience was rather a confusion of imagery, to the extent that nothing really could be discerned as to what was featuring in the scenes and situations I was in. It was one of those experiences where there is an overwhelming quantity of visual data all blended in together, that the personal self can't make much sense of it. The analogy I have used before is like watching 1,000 television channels at once, and everything is interwoven. In these situations, I would suggest that my awareness is skipping through scenes and places simultaneously, and at a rapid fire pace with the corresponding imagery, and this is the visual result for the personal self. Evidently then, the scenes are not important, and are not experiences for becoming more aware purposes, just a by-product of whatever is taking place. For the overall sense of what was occurring was apparent. The impressions were that I was with a group of awareness becoming individuals, and we were practicing a new, real side skill. Various alien species are not subjected to the created and agreed upon idea of a time, and can consequently slip in and out of time phases. They can travel back and forth in time and space creation, and carry out much by way of time dabbling mischief to effect ripples of causality that make alterations that are desirable for their controlling purposes. Though this they do from a personal self-creational basis, whereas through the real awareness, one can do likewise without the use of dangerous created technology. You can step into the isness of your true real awareness self, then place your view anywhere you want in creation, at any time or place. This real side experience practice then was along these lines. It wouldn't be necessary to practice, however, the assuming of a view through the real awareness of anywhere you wanted, as this would just occur naturally. As you set intents, carry out various beneficial assignments on the real side, so your real awareness affords the personal self the relevant views accordingly, wherever in time and space creation they happen to be, as we carry out our assignments. So this practice then seemed to be the possibility of a time travelling along similar lines to that utilized by the reptilians and other aliens, though absent of the technology, as though we could do so through our very physical body vehicles. I'm uncertain if this would mean an actual physical transportation of the body and awareness through time, but then absent of the physical vehicle, transition to anywhere in creation is available through the real awareness anyway, as I said, unless you were, of course, locked into your personal self only, and then your positioning beyond the physical vehicle is designated and limited by recognition and intent, etc. And perhaps then this is another physical level option being made available, along with the possibility of portals as an evacuation means, with all the practice the Nufriends had in regards to making such portals on the real side several years ago, along with the possibility of extraction from agreeable aliens, who would have negotiated with the guides their assistance in return for karmic debt alleviating, say, all for the purposes of providing options should situations become so adverse as to be unworkable here on the earth. And so can it be that we may actually be able to transport our physical vehicles to other locations, teleportation or by location if you will, but also to be able to transport ourselves through time, as was seemingly the practice here on the real side. I had amusing notions of, say, if the dark forces burst the door down of my house, armed with vaccination needles, I could activate this time travel ability. I could reappear an hour or so before their arrival, and knowing then they were coming, could have that extra window to make good my escape. This then would make sense, and such a time travelling of the physical vehicle capability would be beneficial in affording us greater survivability as we go about our physical level activities on ever increasingly dangerous grounds. For although detail was not available to the personal self, the overall sense of what was going on was, including the certainty that on waking and returning to the physical, that this ability had been practiced, and that the group and I were fully proficient in activating this ability. Although my personal self wouldn't know how, so perhaps in emergency situations, the personal self will be activated automatically by the real awareness to jump through time after an intent of destination is set, or maybe also chosen by the real awareness, and the personal self just goes with it, assured that the real awareness knows best. So maybe it was more along the lines of a kind of adjusting, alteration, or enhancing of the physical vehicle frequencies on the real side that this can now be done. A few nights later, I had a real side experience along these time-jumping lines, and because the real awareness can be anywhere and any when it so chooses, making time jumps unnecessary, this must again be more a future view of a physical level practice. For I was with two others, a man and a woman. We were stationed in a kind of a bunker or other, and sat in chairs. We would each have our eyes closed, and activate this time-travelling by location ability. And indeed, we were successful. We would find ourselves launched into a future time of the Earth, but more a dimensional variation of it, as was my impressions. The sense was of going forward, but slightly off to the side as we travelled. Seems the destination wasn't important, just the practice, I would have said. And then we arrived, quite apparently on Earth, with humans doing what they generally, one-dimensionally, involve themselves in. It seemed quite a brutish version of Earth. Everyone carried sharp crescent-like weapons that attached to their belts, and random acts of violence were not only frequent, but dismissed and overlooked, as though this were rather a lawless society, and people could kill and maim as they saw fit. Despite this, it seemed to be generally working, in that it wasn't utter Mad Max chaos. There was a political control structure in place, and a kind of order to everything. We actually at one point sought an audience with high-ranking political diplomats, and the cost of our acceptance and admission into their presence was us receiving a slash across the back with one of these crescent blade weapons. I would speak with one of the women political figures, and most of what she said I was unable to bring back to the physical on waking. But she did say their leader or president was an individual called Stefan, though I was unable to bring back to the physical his last name. Also, regarding the currency, it seemed it was rather devalued here, as a coin here was approximately 2,000 times worth less than the same quantity in our current Earth time and space position. As such, when we were looking through the windows of a confectionery store, the cost of the cakes had extremely long numbers as price tags. Also was the curious means by which they advertised here. They had recreated clones of random people, and these cloned bodies would be holding up various advertisement signs, etc., throughout this city. They were not body vehicles animated by awareness, just the vehicles and used for this purpose alone. When I discussed this with the political peoples, they also mentioned how the cloned vehicles were designed, that they had a magnetic polarity that was such to that of the usual human body vehicle that it caused a repelling effect. In other words, like two magnets of the same charge, positive, say, the electromagnetic fields repel each other, and so you could never walk into these cloned vehicles. You couldn't touch or damage them in any way. They were anchored to a certain point, but would bob and weave as you reached out to touch them. As you moved your head toward them, they would lean backwards, etc. For naturally, I had to experiment and see this for myself. There were entire clusters of these cloned vehicles used for advertising the contents of supermarkets and other places that had great variety of content for sale. The supermarket clones, for example, each held a different piece of produce or grocery item, and so, as you moved through this sea of cloned advertiser vehicles, you would see all the products they presented, but none of them would impede your path, as they automatically were repelled by the polarity between you and they. At one point, my two companions had returned back to the initial bunker, and I seemed to be having difficulty with my vehicle teleportation ability, so was rather stuck here for a time. It was as though some internal physical vehicle frequency had to be adjusted, and my intent was enough that it be so, but it took a few moments, and then I popped back and joined the others back in the bunker. Curiously, it seemed that we all had a distinct lack of a personal self-memory recall of certain details of our adventure, and so the woman in our group would not physically transport herself back, but rather assume the view of the place we had been through her real awareness, and at the same time speak through her personal vehicle to us as to the details she was collecting. She seemed skilled in this particular ability, to be real awareness viewing a place and simultaneously able to divulge it through her physical vehicle, similar to how Dwayne described writing the new books in certain places on the physical while his real awareness was going about the adventures. So me and the other man would be scribbling down notes of all that she said. Unfortunately, these specific details I did not bring back to the physical on waking, but this perhaps was secondary in importance to the possibility of being able to potentially move the physical vehicle through time and space creation, and this second part of the experience suggested it may become so, that this is achieved by simply setting an intent as to the destination and the travelling be automatic, or simply the intent to relocate and the real awareness deals with the particulars, the destination, etc., if we find ourselves in undesirable situations on the physical level.
Val and I saw a movie last night. Yeah, and it was along these lines. And when you began your experience there, Kevin, yes, the little stinkers that we have to deal with in this world, they're doing mischievous things. Well, in this movie, it's very good. It shows how they go into the future and they do their prophecies, and it's always of doom or some disaster, etc. And they set these things up. And again, like the Bible and what have you, many people say, oh, gee, well, the predictions came true. Well, that's because they set them all up. And just like the discoveries on the earth of bones and skeletons and dinosaurs and big people, whatever, they set all this stuff up. That's what they do. And so in your experience there, the time travel is an interesting thing. Okay, so yes, there is such a thing, but it's a phenomena. It's a very interesting phenomena just to be aware of. But with your real awareness, you don't need to do this. The dark brats like time travel and all that, so they can manipulate time and people and situations, where when you have your real awareness and you can identify these things, you don't need to do that. It's all here now. It's an isness. But anyhow, in the meantime, you're going through this to have an objective view, which is so cool, Kevin. Yes, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was sort of suggested in the experience that this was, even though this was just phenomena in creation and had nothing to do with the real awareness and the ears, etc., that it was the possibility of a survival option to allow us to be to better survive all the arduous situations and the dark force characters on the physical level. So as I suggested in the experience, if, for example, suddenly they came knocking at the door with their vaccination needles and there was no escape from the situation, if one, say, were able to suddenly time travel, they could time travel backwards to about an hour or so before the vaccination people arrived, and obviously then, armed with the knowledge they would be coming in an hour's time, have a greater window opportunity for escape. So I don't know if that was... I had the impression it was something that the guys were possibly helping with us with just simply as a survival option here on the physical, but you suggest it's just simply for providing more objective views then?
Well, realistically, there's many ways to look at it. Okay, so Our thing right now, because of what's going on, yeah, we can skedaddle, we can go here or there, whatever, or we can confront it. You know, let's say the vaccine people come to the door. Be prepared to have a little interesting talk with them, okay? And it might enlighten them a little bit, etc. So there's different ways to do it. Even worst case scenario, if you take the vaccine, it's whatever, but it's that confrontation that we're looking for now to you know, face to face with these people, the aliens, etc., because of what's happening. So we're not running and hiding. We're not doing things. We're not time traveling, etc. We're facing it, and that makes sense because we are actually helping these people become more aware by doing it. And they know that a lot of people are going to be resistant. They already know that. And so here we're coming up with something that makes sense for everything. So again, you make the choice. I'm not concerned. I just deal with it a step at a time, but I prepare myself for the confrontation because that's why I'm here. Just like what we're doing and putting out into the world. We're not putting it out there, then we're running into the future somewhere in some time travel thing. Thing is that, yes, we do have that option, and at certain times that becomes so. But for the most part, we're here to confront the situation and what these people are doing for them to, you know, the only reason they're doing it is because they lack the understanding of seeing what's completely going on. And this is most of the public too. You know, people have been set into motion with ideas, and that's their bubble. They have been told what to say and think and do, etc. Well, when they see the whole picture, all right, then they see what's going on and they understand there's this understanding there and there's not this distortion. So the individuals creating the distortion, they're afraid because they don't understand themselves. So they have a fear factor there. So they create distortion. So again, as we confront what's going on, you know, we're actually providing a service and becoming more aware and more courage, etc., by that very fact of preparing ourselves to constantly confront the issues every single step of the way, every moment in our lives. You know, it's a new time. It's not a time where you go off in the mountains and you meditate and do all these things. We're not doing that. The new you is not that. You can get up in the morning, just sing new you and go off to work and whatever. It's confronting every situation because of how the world is and how screwed up it is. People need help. And these knuckleheads that are doing all this bad stuff, they need help too because they don't know. So that's what we're here for. Say. So they're lucky we're here. Yeah, go ahead, Kevin. There's many ways to see this, yes. And your way is right too. And it's however you decide, you see. But everything is here now. It's all in isness. And because there's so much distortion going on, you know, look at the animals in that. Did they time travel? Did they do all this stuff to the birds and that? They don't care. It's people. They get all these ideas going, thinking that, oh, gee, we can do this. We can jump up there. We can do this. We can change this, whatever. That's not what life's about. It's about awareness. We've done this for lifetimes. We've played with all this phenomena. Now it's time to get to the bigger picture, but that's tougher to gain the focus as opposed to the personal self that wants to play with all the pieces. So we have to deal with that personal self. That's the biggie. And in the meantime, you have these experiences to get objective views accordingly. You see? So, yeah. And anyhow, so what you're doing is very important, Kevin, because it is giving people these views, but they need to keep going and learn to recognize the isness, which is a completely everything. And that's the big adventure. That's the big journey to do that.
Yeah, that's really cool. You know, Paul talked about this in his books. Some of the saints in Europe, one was under execution and he just disappeared, and the other one, Siena, Father Siena or something, he's seen at more than 2 locations at the same time, reported. And So this is, you know, people have been able to do this. It's just kind of the intent and the idea, put it out there in your training on the real side for it. Come back, tell us how to do it. But see, we're so limited here with the restrictions and for the controllers of like just dulled our imagination to where things like this is like just it's on TV and the movies, but we don't have the ability, we can't do it. But yeah, we can do stuff like this. We're awareness, and we have all these bodies to work with. So anything here is possible. Just it takes, again, time, and it's so cool. You're time jumping, portal hopping, all this stuff. It's just so really cool, Kevin. The adventures you're having, and it could be useful, yes, in the future here, as people are so restricted and controlled. Things like this is a good, you know, can be a good avenue for people to survive a little bit longer and then teach others how to do it. And Milrepa flying around, you know, I mean, it's all this is possible. So thank you. That's all from me, basically. Thanks, Kevin.
I mean, our simulation and experience in creation is exactly what we decide. Whatever we decide, whatever we agree with, are the ideas we put in our consciousness, and then that is our affected experience. And so it follows then that any limitation we experience are simply then these ideas of limitation we have also installed in the consciousness. And so by that token, you can see that it's very likely that the limitation has very much been ingrained in the consciousness through the controllers, as they certainly would want people to be as limited and controllable as possible. And so rather a collective species is somewhat limited through the consciousness, through that collective consciousness, particularly as it has been managed through agreements to limitation, if indeed another species is oppressing it. But of course, people aren't resigned to their consciousness, because as individuals become more aware, they can learn to sidestep the consciousness. And if they do that, they're no longer limited to whatever its construction happens to be. And then you're entering into the areas of the parts of the self, the aspects of the self, such as the ethereal, where basically you're unlimited potentially in what you can actually do, because you have moved from a consciousness, which again, as I said, any limitations you experience in your simulation is simply that which is installed as idea agreements in your consciousness. And so it's either a case of letting those agreements go, or stepping aside from the consciousness in its entirety, so you're no longer bound by any of its limitation. And so by doing so, then you can quite readily start doing things such as the ability to fly or bilocate or anything you can possibly imagine.
This is where memory serves us, or can serve us, you know, past lives. Maybe we were Tartarians, Breatharians. We had access to portals. Sumerian kings come to mind. They're reptilians, but, you know, they lived for reported 20,000 years or so, their rule. But idea is we can bring in our past memories of our past lives where we did have these abilities and kind of utilize them. That's where the causal plane is. It can be positive, and again, it's like an inspiration, like it encourages us, because if we've done these things before, we can do it again, and now is a good time to have these abilities. Maybe, you know, if you choose to. Again, to share with other people their potential. It doesn't have to be necessarily longevity or being able to fly, but just share with people that they have potential to do whatever, you know. And we're here to recognize the is. and that's with everybody. But how we do it and the avenues we choose is endless and huge. We don't have to do it like the next person. So the potential is there for everybody. It's your choice how you do it. But the education is here, and what we're sharing with Kevin's experiences and the education we provide with a new presentation, it's all part of the process of you waking up and getting that opportunity to do better for yourself. Okay, Kevin, thank you again. New you.
New